Hello, everybody. My name is Neo, and I welcome you to a little deep dive about Stormgate. It is a new RTS coming out very, very soon, and today was an exciting day because we've seen the first gameplay footage of the game 1 year after it's been revealed. And we have a guest on the show to talk about this game, and this guest is one of the developers of that game. Kevin, welcome back to the show. How you doing, man?
I'm doing awesome. It's great to be back on the Back to Warcraft channel yet again, and it feels like I'm here every month these days.
Casting the War 3 Champions 2 and 2 finals with us, but today we have a little bit of a different topic because you are not just a caster and a very likable person, you also have a job, and that is, I guess, game development. Tell us everything about it.
Yeah, my name is Kevin Monk Dong, and I'm a lead designer at Frost Giant Studios working on Stormgate. But before I worked at Frost Giant, I worked at Blizzard on both StarCraft and Warcraft 3. And before that, I worked at Team Liquid, managing part of the Team Liquid and StarCraft websites. But of course, besides being a game developer, a game designer as my day job, I sometimes moonlight as an amateur Warcraft 3 commentator.
You did a lot better than pro Warcraft commentators, so you got that covered as well as pretty good CV, I would say, when it comes to strategy games. Working on Warcraft and Starcraft in the past years. So obviously your goal was to make a new Blizzard style real-time strategy game, but I want to ask you right away, like, why should people be excited for Stormgate, and what's the unique selling point of Stormgate that sets it apart from Warcraft and Starcraft?
Yeah, so I would see Stormgate as first and foremost a Blizzard-inspired RTS. So fans of Blizzard-style RTSs, I think will enjoy what Stormgate is and will be. The one thing about Stormgate is we are not trying to be the next StarCraft. We're not trying to be the next Warcraft. Rather, we're going to try to be our very unique thing. So for fans of StarCraft, a lot of them were when they moved on from StarCraft to Warcraft, and when they moved on from Warcraft to StarCraft when new games release, I think will be as different from those games as they are from each other. In terms of unique selling points, I think number one, we've learned from the development of our previous games, we've learned a lot of lessons from those games, what to do, what not to do, what is fun, and we've also learned a lot of lessons from the industry as a whole, not just Blizzard RTS games, but RTS games in general, just games as an entire industry. And then the other thing about Stormgate is one of our priorities is social gameplay, not just solo campaign or 1v1, but we really want to encourage people to come together and play together. We really believe that social gameplay is the future of gaming. So we want to develop features such as, or modes such as 3VE and 3v3, where the community can gather together and play RTS as a whole.
All right, very excited. We will dive a little deeper into all of this later on in the interview. But for a start, I want to be a little antagonistic right off the bat. Leading up to today, on the various social platforms, we have seen some releases of units from the Human Resistance. And a lot of people made some comparisons to the Terran faction of StarCraft 2, for example. So, with that design in mind, what makes Stormgate different from StarCraft in that aspect?
Yeah, I would say Stormgate is about as similar as StarCraft as you could say Stormgate is to Warcraft 3. So first of all, about the setting of it all, Stormgate takes place in a post-apocalyptic world. So after the apocalypse, after the initial apocalypse, things have kind of calmed down. But then this like second apocalypse occurs. So it's in an earthbound world where things are kind of settled down right now, even though something terrible has happened in the past. In terms of the similarities to StarCraft, I think these similarities kind of occur because um, the it's a human faction, and and it's set in a more modern world as opposed to Warcraft 3. Um, but Stormgate has a lot of features that are not in StarCraft. And there's a lot of features such as we'll talk about later, I'm sure, time to kill, the the asymmetry of the resources that are actually a lot like Warcraft 3, and there's going to be a lot of features that take an inspiration from a lot of other games.
We have seen a little bit about the resources in the gameplay trailer, of course. This is something I really want to touch. But first of all, last time you were here, you talked a lot about the engine because you're using Unreal Engine 5 and you customized that to fill the needs of an RTS game with something called Snowplay. So, what happened in the past 12 months since we talked about it last? How much further are you in development of the game?
We are incredibly further. So when we last talked in 2022, basically the engineers of our team were just getting in the first pieces of Snowplay, and the designers were just getting into to play with the units. So right now, our game is much more developed. And the footage that you see that you just saw from the gameplay reveal was from a build of the game around late April, early May. So you can kind of see the progress we've made since then. So the answer then is like most of a human or the first faction is already in there. Whereas before we've just had like just a few units here and there, and they're just moving around. So we've made a lot of progress in that just 1 year alone.
So, would you say that you have all the tools that you need to bring us the next level RTS that you want to bring to us?
I would say it's we have the initial tools, but it's a very it's a there are so many features in RTS, and I don't think you realize it until you start building an RTS yourself. There are literally like thousands of features in an RTS. A lot of things that you don't think about oftentimes, like for example, when you target an AOE spell, what is the cursor that pops up? Like it shows you what units to target and like how big the AOE is. That's actually like 3 or 4 different features. And again, there are thousands of those little features in an RTS. We have the capabilities of making complex units and complex abilities right now. But one thing that we're working on right now is our trigger editor, which allows us to script custom events. So that's part of why you'll see within the realm of an RTS, you see the 1v1 development come and the PvP development come into play first before campaigns or co-op missions can be developed.
All right, you talk a lot about features, and obviously we all expect the game to have pretty great features because Warcraft 3 is 20 years old, Starcraft 2 is, correct me if I'm wrong, but more than 10 years old already. So it's all from past decades. What are some features that RTS fans should be excited about when it comes to the feature palette of the game?
Yeah, I think one thing that we learned at Blizzard is when players play a modern RTS, they really expect the responsiveness that comes from that comes from StarCraft 2, for example. And that is one of our core pillars and something we're really striving for. And I think I'm really proud of the team for I think doing a really good job at that aspect. For some context, StarCraft 2 had a tick rate of 22.4, and I believe Warcraft had a tick rate of 8. And most RTSs don't come close to the Warcraft 3 tick rate of 22.4. But in Stormgate, our tick rate and our engine will be 64. And what that means is every second, the game will be polling your commands 64 times. Whereas in Warcraft, the game only responds to commands every 8 times, for instance.
So
Or in
would
StarCraft, the game will only responds at 22.4 times.
for people who are not too knowledgeable about that stuff, would that be an equivalent to like a refresh rate of a monitor, for example?
It's not exactly the refresh rate of a monitor. It is they're desynced. The refresh rate of monitor is just depends on how many times the visuals refresh. Whereas for Stormgate, for example, let's say your tick rate was 1, then if you spam 20 commands, then all go. They would all the game would respond to them all at the end of 1 second. Whereas your computer can still show let's say your refresh rate for your monitor is like 120, then your computer would still show the unit moving very smoothly, even though it's not responding to your commands as responsibly.
All right.
And
So what I get
thanks for
from
asking that, by the way. That's a pretty common point of confusion.
Thanks for clearing that up, of course. So the takeaway from this is that Stormgate is like 2.5 times as responsive as StarCraft is.
StarCraft 2, yes.
StarCraft 2 is. That's pretty damn impressive, I gotta say. From the background and the architecture a little bit to the graphics. Of course, everyone sees the game and the first thing they see is not what's under the shell, but what they see is the shell. So tell us why you decided to go for this look that you have right here. It's a little bit cartoony, it's pretty bright, it's not dark and gritty or whatever. So tell us all about the graphics.
So the direction with our graphics is that number one, our first and foremost goal by far is we aim to be a readable game from the top-down view. That is very important for an RTS. You have to be able to tell what units are on the map, and you have to be able to differentiate units from one another with the silhouette. And we believe the art style we've chosen has clearly communicates that. And hopefully you agree we can head in that direction with the gameplay reveal that we've just shown. That being said, we're very open to feedback about specific units in particular. And even between when the gameplay footage was shot and currently, we've made some slight alterations based on feedback. For example, the Atlas, which you see in the gameplay reveal, has some alterations done to it in the current build of the game, which differentiates the two modes of the Atlas a lot more. So you can clearly see when an Atlas is deployed, when versus when an Atlas is undeployed, and that is directly from feedback that comes from not only content creators such as you guys, but the community when they saw those images as well.
Here is the Atlas. I wanted to go into this a
Mhm.
little bit later, but since you're talking about it, yeah, this is a unit that has two modes, as you can see, one with the Gatling gun and one with the bigger gun. I don't know if you have any keywords for that already.
Yeah, we use the keywords deployed and undeployed
Deployed and undeployed.
for
All
that.
right. So yeah, making things pop out. I had to cast some tournaments with the Warcraft 3 Reforged graphics, so I appreciate that a lot. That you want to distinguish stuff. Is it also a choice for longevity to go with this style because it's not going to be as outdated as, for example, a more realistic approach?
Yeah, totally. And I think Warcraft 3 is a great example of that. I think Warcraft 3 is a game from what, 25 years ago. And I think the graphics relative to its actual age hold up amazingly well.
All right. I think that's a good reason to go for this art style. It's also good that you're still adjusting. In after the content creators summit, we've seen some people comparing the design and the color palettes, for example, from a StarCraft 2 beta to what we now have in StarCraft 2. So that's vastly different, and I guess we can maybe expect that after some community feedback for Stormgate as well.
Yeah, I'm also curious to see fan reactions to the gameplay reveal because I think I've heard a lot of comments that the graphics are not what they expected from the art that has been released prior to the actual gameplay reveal. So I'm just very personally I'm curious to see the differences in opinion and whether people will have differences in opinion.
We'll see on the Reddits and the socials and of course YouTube in the upcoming few days, and then we'll make a reaction video to the reaction video. How about that?
Oh yeah, I've seen you're really riding on that train lately, Neo, and
I
I'm really glad to see that YouTube comments are the first and foremost place you go to look for feedback.
Put it in the comments, everybody. This guy is reading them all.
Mhm.
All right, so much about the graphics. When, or at least that's what I did when I got Warcraft 3 or any RTS really. I play the campaign, and RTS campaigns are pretty iconic, especially the Warcraft campaign, the Starcraft campaign. It builds a huge world. So, what can we expect from the Stormgate campaign at the moment?
Yeah, so Stormgate campaign, one thing that we really liked about the Warcraft 3 campaign is that they attach you to individual characters that you care about and that you go through their journey with throughout the entire campaign. I think Arthas is a great example, that you go through this entire journey with him, not only through the human campaign, but also through the undead campaign. And you can see his motivations and you can see why he became the person he became. So we're taking advantage of that, and putting that in Stormgate where you will follow individual characters throughout their journeys. And luckily for us, we have the lead campaign designer from the Frozen Throne on our team, who is happens to be our game director. I'm very excited about what that team will bring up in terms of campaign. In addition, we'll have the option, because we are going for a social RTS, we'll have the option to play as either one player or multiple players in a campaign in a three-player co-op mode. Yeah, a three-player co-op campaign mode, I guess. So yeah, just Blizzard style campaigns that you've loved and enjoyed in the past, the ability to be more social.
All right, so for the gameplay of the campaign, I think RTS campaigns oftentimes suffer from having not the most variety in objectives. It's very normal to have just build a base and kill your opponent. So, is there anything that you think about to implement, like new objectives and making things more exciting?
Yeah, I think that's always the thought of RTS developers, and I think just over the course of the 30 years of RTS, Blizzard RTS, I think the Blizzard team has done a wonderful job making it not that specific game type mission. And I think StarCraft 2 was especially StarCraft 1 was especially guilty with it. But I've actually heard feedback from StarCraft 2 campaign players um, that the campaign team went too far in the opposite direction,
Okay. Yeah, we had some
where there's
elements
not
there.
enough building a base.
Yeah,
Sorry, go ahead.
there were some elements there that kind of remind me of an action RPG at times in the StarCraft 2 campaign. So you
Mhm.
try to balance that at the moment?
Yeah, I would say so. We also have someone on the team who worked on the Nova Covert Ops campaign, and which was, I would say, wildly different from like a traditional RTS campaign. It was the fourth campaign that was released as DLC on StarCraft 2 that had a lot of wild ideas. So we're definitely hoping to create a mix of ideas in our campaign. One thing that's also uh, really unique about our campaign, or a couple of other things that I just remembered, is number one, we plan to have seasonal campaigns. So we are a free to play game, of course, and we plan to offer campaign packs on a regular cadence. So you'll constantly have campaign content. I know for a lot of RTS players, you have that feeling of, oh, this great new RTS just came out, and let me play all the campaign missions. And you spend a few hours doing that, and then you're like, okay, let me wait until 5, 10 years later for the next RTS to come, and then I'll play campaign again. So we're hoping to release this content on a more regular basis, and not only that, we hope for real life events to affect the outcome of our campaigns. For example, if Neo, you win the next Stormgate Cup, maybe there's going to be a hint that your faction or the unit that you used it with is permanently captured in the next campaign mission.
That will obviously gonna happen with my RTS skills, no problem about
Uh-huh.
that. I don't know if you can share this already or if this is even set in stone yet, but when the game comes out, somewhen next year or in the next couple of years, will we be able to play all the factions you have in the game in the first part of the campaign, or will it just be about the human resistance at first?
Right now, the plan is to just have the campaign about the human resistance on early access when we release the game in a way to what can be publicly played.
All right. Good stuff about the campaigns, I guess. Let's talk about the actual game a little more, because what we've seen in the gameplay reveal is that you are set on resources in the game now.
Yeah, I wouldn't say they're completely solidified, but we definitely have a direction that we're going with. We have our primary resource and our secondary resource. Primary resource is currently called Luminite, and our secondary resource is called Therium. And in terms of what they do, it's very similar to a Warcraft 3 or a Starcraft in that Luminite, which is the gold mine looking resource, is the primary resource, which where you can build base. Everything costs Luminite, and you build like your main structures, your town hall, for example, with Luminite. And then for Ethereum, that is your tech resource, which you use to tech up into the tech tree and get more and more advanced units.
All right, so the first resource, we kind of know it like the minerals in StarCraft, like the gold in Warcraft. But the second resource is not reminding me of a Blizzard RTS, but very much Command and Conquer.
Totally. That was our initial inspiration. It's a resource that spreads. There's a generator node. The generator node the generator spawns nodes which resources can or units can pick up. So what we're taking there is it's this is an example of where we take inspiration not only from Blizzard style games, but we're thinking how can we add more nuance and add more strategy to this resource. And not only from Command and Conquer, we're taking a lot of inspiration from the Age of Empires franchise when we're designing not only this resource, but just the resource economy as a whole. So with this resource, uh, there are so many aspects of it, but I'm going to try to explain it somewhat succinctly. Um, this resource often starts off in a block state where there is a blocked resource generator, and you have to attack it and kill it to spawn a Ethereum resource generator. The Ethereum resource generator will gradually spawn resources over time, or spawn nodes over time that the human resistance workers, which we call Bobs, can harvest. Um, and so you can, for example, when they start spawning, you can put um, 2 or 4 workers on this resource, and they'll start mining at a reasonable rate. But if, let's say, this resource patch has spawned to 25 nodes, then you can put 25 workers onto this resource, and you'll get an additional boost of income. So unlike Vespian gas and Starcraft, where you're limited to 3 or 6 workers per Vespian node, the amount of resources, or the amount of workers, or the number of workers that you can put on this node can drastically change depending on both that. And there's actually a lot of other factors that determine how many workers you want on this resource.
All right, so in the Blizzard games, you obviously have the Vespene gas in your base. You also use the lumber that is around your main base in Warcraft 3. So, what made you put one of the resources outside of the base?
So what we're trying to achieve there is we don't want the game to feel too gamey in a sense. I think one of the weaknesses of the StarCraft franchise, and I think something that Warcraft does better, is that the StarCraft for maps or PvP RTS maps in the StarCraft franchise, they feel like it's a video game, and it's not part of a real lived-in world. Um, and part of what causes that is these mineral formations that are always in a concave, in a kind of a semicircle. And these 2 Vespian geysers in StarCraft 2, or 1 Vespian geyser in StarCraft 1, that always spawn in a very similar way. And we want to create a scenario where these resources, they feel naturally placed on the ground. Um, Not only that, but we took a lot of inspiration from StarCraft 1 map makers who are constantly innovating on where to place resources. So oftentimes they make mineral walls with resources, or they put Vespian geysers alone, or there's like mineral only expansions. So we're hoping to create greater variety in terms of like map layouts, essentially. There's another aspect of the Ethereum generator that I guess I can talk about now, which is currently the workers take a long time to mine the resource. So because of that, the percentage or the ratio of time it takes to harvest the resource is much more geared towards the mining rather than the travel time. So you're actually encouraged to long distance the secondary resource, at least with the human faction currently. Yet another aspect about these both resources is that we plan to we plan to vary how each of the factions will harvest these resources. So what you see with the human faction will not necessarily be how the other factions harvest. And we take a lot of inspiration from Warcraft 3 in that aspect. All the factions harvest resources in vastly different ways, and they have very different strengths and weaknesses um, based on how they harvest resources. You often hear humans complaining about their militia being destroyed, right? Or their peasants being killed. That's a shout out to Todd there in the Stormgate interview. Always gotta put a shout out to Todd somewhere.
Always.
Um, and as opposed to, let's say, an orc player who they can hide their peons in the burrows, but the burrows are the units that are exposed, and all the way to night elf, which they can put the wisps all over the map in order to harvest lumber. So a lot of inspiration from there. So hopefully you can see we haven't even talked about Luminite yet, but hopefully just from the explanation of this one resource, you can hopefully see where all these the inspirations from all these other RTSs come into play when we're developing Stormgate.
It's a nice potpourri, for sure. That on first view, sounds like that's very harassable, though. The human faction
Uh,
around.
yeah, well, maybe Todd doesn't want to pick this the humans yet again as the Stormgate faction.
It's good advice coming from the first ever tournament winner of a Stormgate tournament. Another thing that you put on the map is creep camps, or what is very similar to what we in Warcraft have as creep camps. So, what is similar to Warcraft 3 creep camps, and what is different to Warcraft 3 creep camps, and why did you put creeps on the maps?
Great question. Wait, can I talk about Luminite before
Oh,
we
of course.
move
Oh,
on?
yeah. Talk about Luminite.
Uh,
Yes, of course.
all right. So Luminite is our primary resource, and at first glance, it looks like a singular node, but it actually contains four smaller nodes within it. So what we wanted to achieve there is we wanted a primary resource that was more core to the Blizzard franchise, I would say. So it's a little more understandable. But we wanted to achieve two goals there. Number one, we wanted asymmetry in terms of how the factions harvest it. We we want the ability, for example, to put a haunted gold mine on top of it or to build structures on top of it. And we wanted these resources to feel again more lived in a real world, which is why we decided not to position them in a concave on the map. And then finally, something that I think will speak to the StarCraft 1 and StarCraft 2 audience is that because there are these four nodes, we are able to put some additional hidden mechanics into the game where the for every successive worker that you put on this resource, you actually gain decreasing rate of income. So, for example, your first worker, let's say, returns 100 luminite per minute. Your second worker might only return 95 luminite per minute, and your third worker will return 90 luminite per minute. And what that allows us to do is allows us to do two things. It allows us um, to encourage players to expand. So four workers on two Luminite fields will mine greater income than two workers on four workers on two Luminite fields will mine greater income than four workers on a single field. And number two, what that allows us to do is it mitigates the effectiveness of harassment in some ways. So when you lose, let's say you have 10 workers on a Luminite node, if you lose half of them, you'll only lose maybe 30% of your income rather than losing 50% of your income, as you do in StarCraft 2 and Warcraft 3 sometimes. And this is directly from lessons that we learned while working on StarCraft 2, where because of changes to resource mining between StarCraft 1 and StarCraft 2, um, and players are less encouraged to expand. Harassment is very meaningful and arguably too meaningful, and you're kind of capped at a certain number of workers, um, or you kind of always want like 70 to 90 workers, and your max army is capped at a certain point. So there's my spiel about Luminite. Do you want to hear about creeps, Neo?
Oh man, tell me everything about creeps, as this is, of course, as a Warcraft fan, pretty exciting for us.
Yeah, so creeps, we took a lot of inspiration from a lot of games, RTSs up regarding creeps. So obviously the obvious one that comes to mind is Warcraft 3. We really liked what creeps did in Warcraft 3 on the map. And let me pull back a bit, and I want to say that the primary goal of creeps comes from the fact that we really value territory control as uh, as a kind of a core pillar in RTS. And if I were to say like what are one of our like absolute like fundamental guidepost is we feel like territory control or the idea of territory control is what is a great part of what makes RTS. So the fact that you're constantly fighting for areas of the map, and that in order to control this area of the map, you have to give something up. You have to you have to stretch yourself thinner. And that is why we're encouraging like expansion, taking over the map, and we're encouraging you to explore areas of the middle of the map, for instance, um, uh, in order to um, spread yourself thin and achieve map dominance. So the idea with creeps is that that allows us something to do that with. And creeps in Warcraft 3, they're this thing that spawns on the map, and you kill it and you get rewards on the map. But one thing we discovered about Warcraft 3 um, is that once you kill the creeps, you no longer have an incentive for map control. Yes, there are these like sometimes like heal fountains or goblin labs or like shops that you do want to go to, but all of these are relatively temporary. You kill the creeps, and then if the creeps aren't guarding anything, you basically never want to go to that area again.
Mhm.
And the other thing is you oftentimes, well, not often because maps are designed pretty well these days, but sometimes you have this scenario where you kill all the creeps and then you have no reason for map control. You turtle in your base. What I like to call like the Echo Isles phenomena. Maybe not so with Echo Isles 2.0. I actually haven't watched too many games on that map, but yeah, it's the Echo Isles phenomena. So we looked at how can we solve this problem with creeps. Um, the second part is we took a lot of inspiration from StarCraft, StarCraft 2 specifically. There's an interaction in StarCraft 2 where specifically Terrans are encouraged to kill creep tumors, and Zergs are encouraged to respread those creep tumors. And there's always a back and forth between the two factions as who can who kills these creep tumors versus like can I spread them? And there are so many micro decisions there about do I go there to kill this tumor, or do I move my queens over to position them in order to respawn or spread this tumor? And this idea of like these mid map objectives constantly causes action to be in the game, and constantly causes these like small engagements and skirmishes that we're looking for to just increase interactivity between the two players. And then finally, we took a look outside the RTS genre. We took a look at MOBAs, and one thing that MOBAs really innovated with creeps is that they respawn over time. So we thought, hey, what if we just took Warcraft 3 creeps in many ways, and then allows them to respawn. So it solves one problem, or many of the problems that we perceive with Warcraft 3 creeps, which is they are they do not once you kill them, the reason for territory control is over, and you can get in these stalemate positions once all the creeps are gone. So the general philosophy behind we haven't talked about rewards, but the general philosophy about the placement and the objective of creeps is for the mid-map territory control that we want to encourage, and we want to encourage those interactions caused by mid-map territory control. And we don't want there to be as many creeps as you might see in a Warcraft 3, because again they respawn, so we don't need as many of them on the map. And because of that, we're able to add we have additional space and to add other map features that we might want into the game. So yeah, there will be lots of creeps in Stormgate, but they won't be as prevalent as they are uh, in a Warcraft 3, because they do respawn. And that is that is the 5 minute spiel on where we get to creeps from.
You won't put a lot on creeps on the map, but you talk a lot about creeps for sure. But I am very confused as a Warcraft fan, of course, because we have heard that there is no heroes in Stormgate. Is that still the case or subject to change? Is there hope?
So there won't be heroes in 1v1 PvP of Stormgate, but you'll see them in other modes, including the campaign, the 3ve the 3ve co-op mode, and the 3v3 mode, which you will be able to pick a hero.
All right. So in one-on-one, I can't pick a hero.
Mhm.
So I assume there's no experience and there's no items if I creep the creeps. So what
Mhm.
kind of rewards are there if I complete this objective?
Well, the feeling that you dominated that creep.
You can finally kill something. Nice.
Yeah. Yeah, but the real answer there is there's in Warcraft 3, creeps do three things. They give you experience, they give you some gold, and they give you some kind of drop. So usually it's an item, but sometimes it's like a tome or a rune, for instance, that persists on the map. In Stormgate, they also do one of three things, or possibly all those things. So number one, like in Warcraft, they give you some resources. Last hitting them currently gives you resources. Number two, it gives often a player-wide buff. So it's not a buff to all your units. It's not a buff to the units in the area, but it's a temporary buff to all the units that you own. And how we've designed a lot of these buffs is we don't want there to be we don't want there to be changes in the unit to unit interactions. So these buffs won't be like gain uh, 20 armor on all my units, for instance, right? But instead, there'll be things um, such as increase the production speed of your workers, or increase your construction speed, something that happens outside of combat. So you'll be able to see at a glance, hey, I have army A, my opponent has army B. There will never be a buff that changes the interaction there. Another idea for a buff is plus siege damage or plus damage to buildings, which we see as a way to allow us for comeback as a comeback mechanic. Even though that doesn't change the interaction between unit to unit, it does allow for chaotic base trade scenarios to happen, where the losing player has a greater chance to come back. But it
Can
also
I
puts the onus. Yeah, go ahead.
is it not, like this could of course be a comeback mechanic, but isn't it also a little bit dangerous that it's used as a snowball mechanic when the already stronger player has map control and goes for all the objectives on the map to go for that big finishing blow that the weaker player at that moment can't overcome at all?
I think it's a bit of both. Another aspect you can think about it's something that is present in Warcraft 3. Let's say player A is winning and they're going to creeping. They're going to go creep. But because you've spread your attention to creeping, your army is out of position, and therefore a drop or some kind of harass is more effective. And specifically for the plus siege damage, we designed it in mind with comeback mechanics. And the inspiration there is a lot from a little game called Pokemon Unite, where you can kill this like Zapdos in the middle of the map, and and then once you get the Zapdos, you don't get any more power, but your ability to score is increased. So it's like kind of like a almost like a your power in a side grade way, or your power to do like the side objective or like the non-combat role is increased. So even though you might be losing throughout the entire game, your chances to come back are greater.
All right, so just to sum this up, the objectives that creeps give you, or the bonus that a creep camp gives you, is more of a nice to have than a super overpowered mechanic to win you the game.
Yeah, I would say it's not only a nice to have, but it's also very specific.
Mm-hmm.
Um, like worker production, I think is like very specific, right?
Yes.
Or and it gives you and the goal there is to kind of to like push you to getting these rewards if you or to push you to killing these creeps if you really want that reward, where it might not always be useful, for instance.
Are the
Um,
rewards random or are they predetermined? So
They're predetermined.
okay. So on every map, you know what you're going for. All right, all right, all right.
Yeah. And then I talked about the first two things that these creeps do, which is number one, drop resources when you kill them. Number two, player-wide buffs, and number three, um, they will spawn a temporary um, structure on the map uh, that allows you to control that structure. So an analogy in Warcraft 3 is they'll spawn a temporary heal fountain that you can control,
Okay.
which what that allows us to do is it allows us to retain that the necessity of map control even after the creep has died, because you'll still want to control that area of the map. When the creeps respawn, however, this structure will disappear, and the creeps will respawn, and then you'll have to do that again in order to get the structure back.
But
So
the structure can
for
be
those,
killed by the opponent player.
so we're still iterating on that right now. One thing we're looking at is, for example, the structure is either a neutral structure or it can be controlled by capturing the structure. So a great analogy for StarCraft fans, if you're not as familiar with Hell Fountains, is a Zelnaga Watchtower, where let's say you after you kill the creep, it spawns a temporary like 5 minute Zelnaga Watchtower, and whoever is standing next to the watchtower will get the benefits, which is vision over that area of the map.
Sounds like there's a lot to do on the map in your game.
Yes, there is a lot to do in the game, and there's one thing we're trying to go for is a lot of, like, again, with the territory control, a lot of terrain interactivity. So some things you'll see in the gameplay reveal is that trees are very important, and you can cleave paths through trees. And then for some specific types of trees, only smaller units will be able to fit through those trees, and larger units will not. So again, that all ties back into the core philosophy of Stormgate, which is territory control and territory control, territory control. And we want the map to feel living. We want the map to feel interactive. We always want there to be something that you can do on the map.
All right. If there's so much to do on the map, can you make an estimation of how much of your game is micro and how much of your game is macro? Because of course, a lot of Warcraft fans are a little bit worried that there's too much macro to be done that shifts it more towards Starcraft, and I guess the other faction is a little worried that things are a little bit more centered as they are in, for example, Warcraft 3.
So I would say with the macro aspect, um, there there definitely is a lot of macro in the game, and some things well, we can talk about this later, but there's a lot of things that will help you with the macro aspect,
Mm.
such as UI features and some forgiveness features that we'll say. In terms of micro, there's also a lot of micro in the game, and part of that is because the when we were designing the time to kill for this game, we kind of looked at StarCraft 2, StarCraft 1, and Warcraft 3. And what we discovered is that um, um, that Warcraft 3 has about a 3.5 or 4 times as a lethality factor as StarCraft 2. Or sorry, the other way around. So the time to kill in Warcraft 3 is about 3.5 to 4 times as much as StarCraft between units. Um, when you add like nukes into the game or AoEs, it actually skews like more towards StarCraft. But it's hard to like really gauge, oh, how much DPS is my nuke doing, right? So where we ended up with is a 2 point time to kill factor as a StarCraft 2, which means our units are 2 times as durable in general versus each other, compared to a StarCraft 2. And that gives you a lot more micro opportunities and allows more forgiveness to, let's say you're not paying attention to a battle, you can micro units out of the way. One other thing we're trying to go for is uh, and we'll get better at this once as the game develops. But we're trying to go for units and abilities that more are differentiated based on their attacking and moving. But in Blizzard RTS, we call those like movers and shooters, rather than their skills themselves. So there will be a lot of micro potential in terms of how you position these units, and how you directly control those units. So I would say there's definitely room for macro players and there's definitely room for micro players. And there will be opportunities. There will be in some ways like comeback mechanics if you're not macroing properly, or if you're not macroing well. There will be certain game styles that will lean towards players who prefer more of that micro play style versus the macro play style.
Okay, so best of all worlds is what you're saying.
Mhm. Well, you'll see once you get to
Hopefully,
play the game.
hopefully. All right. So much for creep spots and map design. Is there anything you want to add to that? Otherwise, I would start looking at the faction that we saw.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
Okay, let's talk about factions. Last time we talked, you said that there's more than two factions in the game. Is that still the case? And do you want to be a little more specific on that?
That is still the case, and I do not want to be more specific on that,
God
or
damn.
someone's gonna yell at me.
I don't want anyone to yell at you. You don't deserve that, man. So, it's also an old talking point of ours that you wanted the factions to be very asymmetric. That is also still the case. What's the reason for that?
Yeah, I think one of the strong points of Blizzard RTSs, and I think one of the defining aspects of a Blizzard RTS is the asymmetry of the races or factions. That there's these problems that you have to solve that only your faction has, maybe, or this weakness that you can exploit in this other faction. Um, I think I don't know. It's just super cool to have like all these things have different play styles. All these factions have different play styles, and to think that like your tools are drastically different from your opponent's tools. And as someone personally who plays all the races in every RTS that I play, I find that to be like a really refreshing um, like uh, pace in terms of like, oh, I can play humans or orcs or undead, and it's like a whole different experience each time. And not only that, but playing human versus orc feels very different from playing human versus undead. So just like the replayability and the breadth of area that you have to problem solve is something that I personally very much gel and vibe with.
I would agree with that. So I don't know how involved you are in this, in the like creation of a faction. But how does it all start? Like, do you design the faction around the lore or the lore around the faction? Like, how do you create a faction?
Yeah, it comes from it's definitely very lore based and it comes from both directions, I would say is the answer. So number one of the first things we did when we came up with all the factions, well, the factions start first, or like what the general like description of what the faction is starts first. And then once that was nailed down, which I'm not involved with, I look at these factions and what is described to me, and then I write down, hey, these are the adjectives of this faction. This is what this faction does. It's what it represents. And then we have this like list of gameplay mechanics. Let's say we have this like it's like literally 100, like a list of 100 gameplay mechanics, and we're like, okay, when we take like a mirror board, which is like a digital whiteboard, and we're like, maybe this one belongs in this faction and this one belongs in that faction. We actually sort it out to see like, oh, like based on these adjectives, do these gameplay mechanics make sense? So that's like kind of the beginning of it. And honestly, we just try like stuff on every faction. And just as an example, one of the units that you will see um, in the gameplay in the pre-alpha um, is actually and it's not an arted unit and it's not shown in the gameplay reveal. We'll actually be moving to another faction. So oftentimes we actually try a unit on one faction. We're like, okay, we like this unit, but we don't like how it fits into the theme and the lore and how, like its role on that faction. So we actually move that unit. So yeah, a lot of it comes from like the lore of the faction, and then a lot of times it's like it comes from the opposite angle, which is, oh, we have this like cool gameplay mechanic we want to try. Let's just throw it in, and then we're like, oh, this is really fun. How can we build lore around this mechanic? So it's kind of to give you some insight, and I think this is honestly how it works a lot of times in a more fantastical RTS that is not based in the real world. Um, how factions are developed. It's just kind of from both angles.
All right. So currently you have two factions announced. That is the Human Resistance and the Infernal Host. How would you describe the feature palette of the two factions? What are their characteristics?
Yeah, so the human faction is designed to be the most approachable faction. So fans of RTS and fans of Blizzard style RTS, for those fans, you'll be right at home. They will have just be very they'll be relatively durable units. You can just build them and they'll do pretty well. And they're relatively easily understandable, not only from their mechanics, but also just from the understandability of like, hey, this guy has a gun, he probably shoots, right? Whereas for the more alien, strange factions, I think a lot of newer players might be thrown off for exactly their role in an RTS. With the human faction, uh, you'll see a lot of tropes that you see from other RTSs. The Atlas, for example, has often been compared to with a siege tank. Um, I personally think it's more of a combination between like a siege tank, a demolisher, and a raven, or sorry, and a reaver from StarCraft 2, Warcraft 3, and StarCraft 1, respectively. Um, oh, there we go. Yeah, so it changes modes like a siege tank. It lobs. Yeah, actually, no one has seen at the time of recording of this video. No one had seen its attack yet. So it lobs energy balls like a demolisher. It puts a puddle of fire on the ground like a demolisher. And in many ways, it's like a reaver in terms of its harassment potential in combination with an evac. Um, again, lots of familiar ideas. And with each gradual successive faction that we create, we're going to go with more wild out there ideas and some ideas maybe that you haven't seen from RTSs before. So if I were to describe the human faction, they're kind of they're just kind of like the resistance against an oncoming invasion. So they'll be relatively defensive. They'll have these different modes for a lot of their units, which we call deploy. Um, and they're going to be very specialized units. One unit that you'll see is like the Lancer, for example. And for the Lancer, we took a lot of inspiration from that unit from like the Footman, which is an example of a human unit in Warcraft 3 that is hyper specialized in something. Um, so the Footman is an example. It's not a great unit early on. It's one of, if not the weakest early game melee unit, but it has a great niche against piercing units. The Lancer in our game, we wanted to achieve something similar, but we also wanted this unit to scale into late game. One philosophy that we have with unit designs is that we want all of our units to be somewhat viable in late game. So Footman is an example of a unit that almost infamously does not do that well. So what this unit does, the Lancer, he reduces all incoming damage above 20 to 50%. So if I take 20 damage, I'll just take 20 damage. But if I take 30 damage, um, I'll take the initial 20 damage, and then anything above 20, which is 10, is reduced by 50%. So he'll take 25 damage, for instance. And this allows him
For
to be a decent early game unit, but allows him to come back later in the game when there's a lot of high powered units that are fighting.
for the Warcraft fan, this should be similar to Mountain Giant Hardenskin.
I would say it's actually the opposite of Giant Hardened Skin, in that Non-Giant Hardened Skin is really good against low damage units, whereas this unit is good against high damage units.
I see.
So it'd be good against Chimeras, I guess.
All
That's the
right.
highest like damage unit I can think of.
So it feels like this that one unit has like two abilities seems like a theme for at least the human resistance. Was that always the goal, to only give longevity, or is there something else behind it?
Uh, So this unit actually only has one ability. So,
It
but
has one
I guess
ability, but how was it described really? Like it's basically a melee unit, but it can also extend the lance a little bit, so it's not exactly melee, but a little bit
so that
range.
that is more of like that I would not necessarily call that an ability. It's more of like it has slightly longer range than a melee unit. So it's like a shorter it's like a shorter range spellbreaker or huntress, if that
Yeah.
makes any sense. So I wouldn't necessarily call the spellbreaker having an ability with it's like slightly longer than melee range.
All right. Let's talk a bit about the other units that we have for the human resistance. As our dear colleague Tasteless revealed, there's the Vulcan. We want to talk about the Vulcan.
Yeah. Let's watch it appear on the screen. Oh, there's its birth animation. Yeah, I think our team did really good job with these animations. These birth animations, you'll see them if your units are not rallied out of a production structure. So like if you're just not rallying your units, you'll see this birth animation play. That's kind of cool. But yeah, this Vulcan, he was featured in our initial cinematic. This is going to be your anti small unit counter. So if you're fighting a lot of Marines in StarCraft, or if you're fighting a lot of troll headhunters, which I know is an infamous unit in Warcraft 3. This is going to be your go-to unit. He does AoE damage in a line, similar to a Hellion in StarCraft 2. And just his base attack, there's something really interesting about it, which is he actually takes a second to what we call pre-swing or charge up before he can actually fire. So even though he's very powerful AoE unit, he does have weaknesses. And if you're an Exo player, which is the human unit with the gun, you can actually kite in and out of his range, and you can allow him to you can kite in and out of his range, and you can actually like not get hit essentially, or get hit very lightly. But if you're fighting in a very like a huge battle, then if you just stand in his AoE, you'll take tremendous damage. So it's an example of how we really want to prioritize movers and shooters. This unit shoots in a very interesting way that to the best of my knowledge, I have not seen in an RTS before, even though it's in some other genres. It also has a jump jets ability, which it can upgrade. The jump jets ability allows it to charge through enemy or charge through units, but only your own units. The first unit that it encounters, it will the first enemy unit it encounters is causes it to stop and stun that unit. So what's really interesting about this is you can kind of think of it like a blink, but in many ways it's both better and worse than a blink. So it's better in the sense that it will stun and deal it'll stun units, but it's worse in that let's say you're surrounded by a bunch of enemy units, you actually cannot jump jet in order to save yourself. It also has the functionality of being able to destroy trees, which you saw in the I think gameplay reveal. Um, there you go. With that mechanic, it allows this interesting. It allows us this interesting dynamic where yes, these guys can't go through trees or walk through the trees themselves because they're big chunky guys, big chunky dudes. Um, and but once you get this upgrade, which unlocks jump jets, you'll be able to chase down those pesky gunners that are running through the trees.
Okay, so with the jump pads, you can destroy trees and then go for it. Okay, that's
Mhm.
a cool start. Then, oops, sorry about that. We had, what else was there? I know Loco revealed something. That was interesting because we didn't really know, or I don't know, do we know what it does? It's the Medtech. We can see it now. So this was
Yep,
the
there it
reveal, and we
is.
were all a little speculating what it does. I'm not sure how much we can talk about it.
Yeah, we can talk a lot about it right now.
Okay.
So it's going to have so this is going to be very similar to a Warcraft 3 caster. One way we've designed some of these units in the game is that they gradually unlock abilities, and they have like an adept training upgrade and a master training upgrade to gradually unlock power over time. So this Medtech, its base ability, it will be able to heal biological units and grant them additional armor. So it's kind of like a combination between heal and inner fire, um, or heal, rejuvenate, and inner fire in some ways. Its second ability, Nanoswarm, will you can cast it on any unit. If you cast it on your friendly unit, it will create a swarm around the unit that heals friendly mechanical units in an AoE. If you cast it on an enemy unit, it will damage all nearby enemy units in an AoE.
Okay.
Enemy mechanical enemy units and an AoE. I probably messed that up. But essentially, you can cast on either your own units or your enemy units, and the Nano Swarm will do something different depending on who you cast it on. So with the MedTech, we're aiming to um, this is kind of like it's a kind of like people have referred to it as like a Saint Bernard um, medical unit because it's got that little like barrel
Yep.
in front. But he's going to be our medical unit, and he's going to have the capability not only to heal biological units, also heal mechanical units with two different abilities. And then the third ability is going to be currently an AOE dispel, which uh, it dispels positive buffs from enemies and negative buffs from yourself. So if you have to put it into Warcraft 3 terms, if you have inner fire and fairy fire on you, your inner fire is a positive buff and fairy fire is a negative buff. Um, it will only dispel the negative buff, the fairy fire on you. So it's kind of like a smart dispel in some ways. And also, it's going to have some what I like called reverse purge functionality, which will speed up friendly units that it's cast on very temporarily, but it won't do anything to the enemy units.
That sounds like a very powerful unit. But I guess you have to
Uh,
upgrade it with tiers. Is there even
yeah,
tiers in your game?
there are tiers in our game. So we're following the Warcraft 3 structure of tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3. It's a very structured way of thinking about tiering. And we took that inspiration not only from Warcraft 3, but also Age of Empires, when for players it was very clear the tick level that that each player was at. There's also a lot of other aspects to why we made that decision, but this is going to be a very long podcast if we go into it.
Okay, maybe for later.
Mhm.
Then we also have the Evac, which is basically a Zeppelin from Warcraft. You see it
Yeah,
here.
exactly. So a few abilities that it has are just so it compared to a Zeppelin, it has a very long pickup and unload range. So a lot of the coolness with this unit is the fact that it can pick up units from afar and then drop them off from afar. And we took a lot. So this doesn't seem like super interesting at a first glance, but one thing we learned from StarCraft 2 is when we increase the pickup range of the Warp Prism, in StarCraft 2, it is actually like a huge change that allowed a lot of micromobility and allowed Protoss players to really show off their skills. Because you can kind of use this unit as like a blink for the units that it's transporting in some ways. You can them up from afar. You can like you can drop them off at a distance. And with enough micro, like yeah, it essentially is a mini blink that attaches to your units. The second ability it has, and one unit that currently all our air units have, is a ability called Return to Hangar, which gives this unit a speed up and returns it to the nearest hangar bay, which is the production structure that this unit comes from. And this is directly inspired from the Company of Heroes retreat ability, which if your unit is in danger, you can hit this retreat button or this back to hangar button, and your units will um, hightail it out of there. And it will once it gets to the hangar, it actually will heal to full health.
Oh.
And it'll be stunned, sort of like a Staff of Sanctuary.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, it gains a speed bonus. It retreats to the nearest hangar bay, heals back to full health, but is stunned during that duration, and then it will travel to the rally point of the hangar bay.
Is this ability just for the evac, or can the evac decide what unit will be going to the hangar?
Uh, It's just for the evac itself.
Okay,
Yeah.
yeah,
So,
okay, good.
but you can put units in the evac and everything else. Everything will
Mm.
go into the hangar.
A-
Yeah.
And everything will
One of
heal.
our not everything, just the evac will heal. But that's a good idea. Maybe everything can heal Neo.
Yeah, it doesn't sound OP
But
at all.
one of our Trevor, who used to be a StarCraft pro, had the idea of building a hangar bay like on the other side of your opponent's base, and then using this ability in order to launch this unit like across the map into your. It's like a like a flying unit catapult in some ways.
You guys are developing cheeses already. I like a lot. All right, that is, I think, everything we've seen from the human resistance so far. But I assume the faction will have more units at launch.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we've only shown something at like six or so units. There's a lot of units we haven't shown, and a lot of units that um, the highest tier units we actually haven't fully developed yet. So a lot of like the super flashy stuff, like the Griffins, or for example, are not in this collection yet.
But what we did see is something from very early on. Basically, your first unit next to the Bob. We talked about this, I think, in our previous interview that you wanted to give factions a way to scout very early, like you can in Age of Empires, and that is also now in the game, as we've seen.
Yeah, that is going to be our SCOUT unit. It's the Scout unit, but it's not. It's an acronym actually.
Uh-huh.
And please don't ask me what the acronym stands for right now.
Never would I
It's
ever.
very cute. But yes, it is. It is a unit that starts off at the beginning of the game, but you all can also build it later on. Every faction in our game will get one of these units, but they'll be different across all the different factions. What this allows you to do is, for newer players, it gives them an easy way to scout the map, especially, and it teaches players that scouting is important. I think the traditional way you scout in a Blizzard RTS is you take a worker and you send it to your opponent's base, or you send it around the map. And that is very unintuitive. Why would I give up economy to scout my opponent if even if I don't know like what to scout for? So yeah, you can move this unit across the map, scout, or you can do other things. You can even start creeping with it if you really want. It's got a very weak attack. But yeah, you can creep with it. It's got some scouting abilities. Its first ability, it's a passive, which um, gives you vision into the fog of war in a sensor tower Terran kind of way. So basically, you will not see the units, but you will see the existence of units through the fog of
Mhm.
war in a relatively high range. It's about like the screen, I would say. And then its second ability on the hunt allows it to increase its vision range. Its vision range is actually very low for a scout, but allows us to temporarily increase its vision range to match the vision range of the radar dish. So it I think it more than doubles its vision range. So those are its scouting capabilities. It can also be made into a combat unit with some upgrades later on, which gives it bonus damage versus certain armor types. So it's got somewhat of a combat role, or you can even make it like a harassing unit later into the game. So it does a lot of things.
So
It's
this,
also
yeah.
mechanical, so it's actually a mechanical unit, despite what it looks like on the outside. So you can actually pair this unit with your bobs.
This also sounds like something to give a player to have more to do early on, because let's be honest, the start of an RTS map can be pretty slow.
Yeah, yeah, that's something that we've been actively working on and tweaking, and something that we learned early on throughout the development of StarCraft and Warcraft. I actually think Warcraft 3 does a really great job of early game pacing. There's like these 2 minutes where you kind of change up your build order, and like you have the opportunity to change up your build order before your hero comes out. But there's always been like this divide in StarCraft 2 where I don't know how familiar you are, Neo, but like the starting workers change from 6 to 12 at a
Mhm.
certain point. And there were criticism from both sides. In on the first camp, six workers felt a little slow, and it felt like you were doing the same things every game for the first, I would say, 6 minutes of the game, which I felt was a little too long of the time. Whereas the 12 worker start felt like players got into the game too quickly, and you kind of just started in the mid game. So we can always vary the number of workers that you start with, but I think giving players a unit at the start that they can kind of scout with and do cool things with early on um, is another way to kind of address this issue.
Okay, that sounds good. I think the first 2 minutes of a Warcraft game are, especially for an observer, very,
Mm.
very boring. So hopefully there will be more things to observe than in the first
You,
Stormgate matches.
I'm just curious. I know you dabbled in casting StarCraft 2 early on in your career. Uh, what did you think of those minutes?
There was a bad time in my life where I was forced to cast a game, and I can tell you that don't feel right. And I didn't do StarCraft 2 justice, and it was a whole different game as well. But I had no
Mhm.
idea what's going on, so hard to say anything about it. I was very, very happy when those casts were over.
This is a very off topic, but I have this like opinion that I think Tasteless and Artosis did so well casting StarCraft, partially because they were so much better than anyone else early on at like filling those like that lull of time that they're so good at
True,
that part.
true. Yeah, we gotta work on that for sure. You gotta work on more factions, obviously. What can you share about the second faction we got, the Infernal Host? Is there anything?
Yeah, the Infernal Host will be kind of it will be like the swarm units. They in many ways they're most similar to either the Zerg or the Undead from 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 Blizzard RTSs. Whereas humans have the philosophy of like, well, we gotta like save every life, like every life counts. Infernals have the philosophy that like individual lives do not matter, and the ends justifies the means. Famous Batrider quote, of course. And basically they will sacrifice any number of their units to achieve their goals. So a lot of concepts such as like they will feature a lot of death in their gameplay. And it might be a scenario where you're encouraged to kill your units in order to achieve greater power overall. They will be ever encroaching slowly onto your territory um, uh, with a mechanic that I won't talk about too much in in this show, but a mechanic called Demon Shroud. Um, and yeah, they're gonna both feature a very high unit count and the capability to play in a play style that has low unit count as well. So the Infernals.
Yay! So to me, it feels like the human resistant design is pretty inspired by StarCraft 2. The infernal design is pretty inspired by Diablo 3. So the not announced third race is then going to be Warcraft themed.
No, it is going to be Lost Vikings themed, Neo.
Oh, damn, that's great.
Uh,
Okay, confirmed here. World exclusive. Thank you for that, Monk. All right, we are almost done here, but I think one part is very important, and that is to help players enjoy the game and to give them tools to learn the game as well. I call it onboarding. What do you do with a player who finished the campaign and the single player experience of the game, but wants more? He wants to join the multiplayer, but he's maybe a little afraid and a little undereducated when it comes to stuff like build orders, for example, or gameplay mechanics.
yeah, so first of all, I would say that traditionally um, the PvP player base and the campaign player base have very little overlap. If we look at the data from Blizzard, previous Blizzard style RTSs, um, traditionally most players, the vast majority of players who play PvP are really not interested in, or play PvE are not really interested in PvP, and a lot of PvP players are not interested in PvE. So one thing we actually don't want to do is we don't want to necessarily have the goal be to transition players from PvE to PvP. And for that segment of players, we have the replayable PvE 3VE co-op mode um, which is a natural progression because it essentially is the campaign, but with more replayability, but with less story and less campaigning. aspects. Um, that being said, I think we still want onboarding tools for players of all of all game modes. So what we're looking to do is to build specific tutorials and onboarding tools for each of the game modes. If you're coming on to PvP, we plan to have both active and reactive tutorials. Active tutorials are, for example, often what you see in StarCraft 2, for example, is there's actually mini tutorials in StarCraft that tell you this is how you A move, this is how you like build a barracks, and this is like, that kind of thing. Whereas reactive tutorials are, hey, I noticed you're kind of blocked on supply right there. You might want to build like a farm or something. Hey, I noticed you haven't moved the camera there, your camera screen in a while. Maybe you want to like pan to the right or pan to the left or pan down. So it's basically like a clippy for us boomers out there.
Yep. Nice. It's not gonna be annoying at all, I hope. But yeah,
Yeah,
that's something I'm curious about as well. Like this is absolutely essential in my opinion, so hopefully you guys nail it. But since you mentioned farms or supply uh, providing buildings, in most of the RTS I know, if these buildings are necessary and you forget about them, oftentimes that leads to you losing the game because it's such an integral part. And it feels kind of bad if you kind of outmaneuvered your opponent for 5 to 6 minutes, and just because you forgot a farm, you lose the game. Is there any plans to weaken these big roadblocks?
yeah, totally. The farm is a great example. We actually early on in development, we actually tinkered with the idea of removing supply structures altogether. But we are really inspired from Warcraft 3 in particular, and how Warcraft 3 makes supply structures into a way where you are you constantly have these like added benefits of supply structures that encourage you to reoccurringly build these supply structures over time. Um, but because they are costed so high, you don't necessarily want to build 100 of them. So I think the Moonwell is a great example where you kind of think about the positioning of your Moonwells over time. At 10 supply, you're like, okay, my first Moonwell has to block Blade Masters. And at the 20 supply mark or the 30 supply mark, you're thinking, oh, I have to block the orc from coming into my base. And at 60 supply or 70 supply, you might want to say, hey, I want to build this moon well at my expansion to help my defense at that expansion. So these like many decisions that happen over the course of the game are something that we're looking for with our supply structures. So that's how we ended up with the idea of like, oh, we should probably still have supply structures in the game. However, as you correctly mentioned, supply blocks are one of the biggest pitfalls in all of like RTS gaming. So as an idea of something that we want to do is we want to make that be more we want to give the players an option to kind of smooth that over. So there's already actually an example of something that does that in StarCraft 2, which is the supply drop mechanic, where you spend some energy on your orbital command in order to double up on your supply structure. And I think that that heads in the right direction. But my criticism with that is that it feels like such a huge mistake. Like you never use that ability. It's like I made a mistake button. You
Mhm.
never use that ability unless you made a mistake. It has no strategic benefit, and you always feel like um, you also broadcast to your opponent, hey, or the observer if it's a pro match, hey, these are all the actual mistakes you did. So with our direction we want to go is we want to have that kind of button, but not make it feel like it's a mistake at every time. So let me give you an example of something we're looking for. So we have an idea right now that the habitat is our supply structure in our game. And even though it's not implemented in the pre-alpha build, one idea we have is, let's say the habitat gives you 15 supply, right? We want there to be a button on the habitat that gives you 5 additional supply, but also has an additional benefit. And one thing we're thinking of there is it gives production speed bonuses to one nearby structure. So there's some strategic benefit in upgrading this if you don't want the supply. Um, but if your supply block, for instance, you can upgrade the structure instantly. Um, without building another supply structure. And even though that's not a cost effective decision, it's an instant way you can unblock yourselves, and it doesn't 100% feel like a mistake because you're also getting additional benefit from it. Or let's say in your build where I want to build um, uh, I want to build like 4 upgraded supply structures sometime in my build. And at a certain point, I'm like, shoot, I'm supply blocked. I'm going to adjust my build slightly so that I'm going to build this earlier upgraded supply structure earlier on um, in order to mitigate that. So I think that's something we're trying to go for with every faction, albeit not necessarily in the same exact way.
That will certainly help feel a little less bad when you forget about it, that's for sure. Speaking of feeling bad, we kind of started this interview by saying that the existing RTS games are 20 and 10 years old, so they probably lack a lot of quality of life features that we have in other games that are newer. So you wanted to talk to me about these features and what you're implementing into Stormgate.
Yeah. Something that we're looking to implement fairly soon is one example is like automated control groups. A lot of RTS players, they build up an army and they are not able to to control them because they're just sitting in their base. So one thing we're trying to do is like, let's say you build a grunt or a lancer, for instance. As soon as the lancer comes out, it will be added into a control group of your choice. So if you're crazy, it can be added to every control group if you want. If I don't know why you'd want to do that, but you will be able to customize it that way. And in our mind, this is kind of like this is kind of a way to um, it's a kind of an evolution of the select all army button, which exists in StarCraft 2, because this is kind of like a more customable version of a select all army button. And you can actually build your own select all army button if you wanted to with the system. Because you can just put every unit into control group 1, and then that's your select all army button, right?
True.
But yeah, what this allows us to do is it allows us to it allows us newer players to interact with their armies and with fewer actions. You don't have to constantly be adding units to your control groups all the time and re-control grouping your units. Secondly, what it does is it allows us we can set defaults as the developers, and we could say, hey, this might be a good starting off point, and we can encourage players to use control groups earlier on than they would have otherwise. Because to be honest, like almost no one in campaign or like early on PvP uses control groups. And for experienced players like yourself, Neo, you know that control groups are a fundamental part of playing a high level RTS. Another thing this allows us to do is it allows us to tutorialize our players in a better way. So for example, let's say our default is all the ground units go into control group 1 and all our air units are control group 2. We can say, hey, the 2 button an A move over there. And that allows us to say, hey, now you just learned how to A move all your air units. Whereas in order to achieve the same goal as before would have been nearly impossible without the automated control group system. Another system that is actually already in the game that and you'll be able to play with is the quick macro feature, which essentially, if you're familiar with Command and Conquer or a Company of Heroes, it's kind of like a way in which you can centrally build any unit or structure from a central point. So with this feature, you can go into your panel and you can select a building, put it on the map. The game will intelligently pick the worker to build that structure with. Um, and this might not be necessarily the best worker. And you can definitely, if you select individual workers, you'll probably be able to get more efficiency out of building. Or if you, for example, let's say you're building a town hall, or in our game, it's a command post. You can send, as an experienced player, you can send a worker early to the point before you have the resources, and you can build a structure right there and then. After you have the resources. But as a newer player, you can just say, oh, after I have the amount of money that I need, I'm going to build it, but it's not going to be as efficient as if you did it manually. So you'll be able to build structures, you'll be able to build units, and you'll be able to upgrade from that structure. And you'll also be able to see how many units or structures or the types of units and structures that you're currently building or training. So those are just two examples of quality of life features that we are either have right now or looking to implement in Stormgate.
Very nice. Sounds very good. Sounds very evolved from what we currently have in our games. I know you're a very, very busy man, and I think we're about to hit the 90-minute mark here. Is there anything else you want to talk about that we didn't touch on that is important to you?
Let's see. I don't think so. I just again do want to say thanks to the community for all the support. This is an ongoing game. We're constantly developing features, and I think I mentioned at the beginning of this show is that there are literally thousands and thousands of features. We're constantly iterating. We're constantly adding new things. Like even just speaking from like a personal perspective, like we are working insanely fast. On the number of features that we are making. Like it actually blows my mind. But that is just like my honest opinion. Um, but there's still so much to be done in building an RTS. And we hope the community like joins us and follows along in our development and sees like just how far we will go from our, I guess, our starting off point, which was 2 years ago, but also the first time you see the gameplay reveals. And what's really helpful from the community is to constantly give that feedback of, oh, what do you like the direction of, what you don't like the direction of, because I do believe like that. I think one of our strong points is like, oh, we are able to communicate with the community and receive feedback and talk to the community very directly. Oftentimes on shows such as yours, Nia.
And of course, on Reddit, I want to give a shout out to because it's a very, very fine place. Reddit.com/r/Stormgate. We are featured there because I sent in the link, but it's a good place to not only give feedback, but to also stay up to date with the game because the community shares pretty much everything there is and also has some very good ideas about the game. Where else can people find information and where can people follow your development?
Yeah, so our official website is playstormgate.com. And if you go there, you can actually sign up for a chance to be in our upcoming beta release, which you'll be able to actually play the most recent up to build version of Stormgate. If you want to help us, oh, there we go. That's the lovely website, and there at the very top is the form, or you just have to put your email, I guess, to sign up for the beta. And if you want to help us out, there's two ways you can help us out. Number one, tell your friends about Stormgate, this like cool RTS made by awesome developers at Frost Giant Studios. Um, and number two, you can go to our Steam page if you just search Stormgate. Oh, Neo's ready. He knows the stick.
So
He's an
prepared,
experienced guy.
so
What a
professional.
professional, consummate professional. You can go to the Stormgate page and you can wish list us on Steam. I think we just recently hit a milestone of 95 on the Wish Steam list, and but by wish listing us on Steam, you rank us up in the Steam algorithm, which allows us to uh, which allows us to advertise and show all more players on Steam, and really tell both Steam and just everyone else out there that hey, people really care about this game. People really care about this genre.
Exactly. Like
Please,
you it's basically
please wish us.
it's basically free advertisement for you guys, and of course this is the first game that your studio is doing, so probably the marketing budget isn't close to a Blizzard game, even though the quality of the game might be there. So free advertisement always helps. Spread it on the socials, as Monk said, wishlist it and join the community. And yeah, that is what you can do to support the game if you like what you've seen today or what you've heard today. If you didn't like what you've seen and if you didn't like what you've heard, then send some feedback. These guys always have open ears and open minds, so maybe it gets changed eventually. But Monk, now we finally saw the gameplay. What's next and when?
All right. So what's next? Well, personally for me, I am actually going to our gameplay reveal party. This is being filmed, I think, 1 hour before the reveal actually happens. But for Stormgate lovers out there, You can keep subscribing to our Reddit. You can keep following our social medias, and to hear additional news about the game. There's going to be a lot more news or more interviews, hopefully, like this one coming out in the next couple of days. So stay tuned for that. Our beta is upcoming. So stay tuned for the announcement of the actual beta, where you can actually play the first initial uh, version or a beta of Stormgate. I guess there's no better word to say than that. Um, but yeah, there's so much just from like my personal side. Like there's so much going on in terms of development. My head is sometimes spinning a bit, but that just means a lot of extra content for the fans out there and a lot of news about Stormgate.
Wonderful, man. Thank you so much for your time. It's a busy day. You still took 90 minutes of your very busy morning. Now I'll let you go. Monk, thank you very much.
All right. And Neo, where's my invite to cast again on Back to Warcraft?
Oh, dude, you're always welcome. It's an open standing invitation. There's a show match going on right now. Want to cast?
Maybe next time.
Maybe next time. Obviously, for the next World 3 Champions finals, you're
Yeah.
gonna be with here. Now have fun at the party, mate.
See ya.